To some breaking news out of the U.S. now, where President Donald Trump has just announced the closure of the airspace above Venezuela. Let's bring in Rosiland Jordan, joining us from Washington, D.C. He's announced this in a Truth Social post. Rosiland, tell us what he said and what all this means.
Essentially, the post from the U.S. President Donald Trump says that this is a warning to airlines, to pilots, I assume both commercial and general aviation, drug dealers and human traffickers, that the U.S. is declaring the airspace over Venezuela. Of course, the U.S. is not in control of Venezuela, but the U.S. is considering the airspace closed until further notice. It does not say exactly how the U.S. is going to enforce this. What we have seen, but perhaps most famously in the case of the closure of the airspace over Iraq in the from the 1980s on until the wars that began in 2003, was that the U.S. military was charged with patrolling the airspace around the Iraqi borders in order to prevent any air traffic from crossing or going in and out of that country. We do not know if that is going to be the case here with the United States. It had been reported on Friday by the New York Times that late in the week of November 21st, a little more than a week ago, the U.S. president apparently had an unreported phone call with Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president, where it seemed, according to those who were sourcing the story, the two men were talking about perhaps having a face-to-face meeting here in the United States and were perhaps discussing ways to try to reduce tensions between the two countries. The U.S., as our viewers know, has been very angry with Venezuela. It blames Venezuela not just for fueling what the U.S. calls an unprecedented migration crisis, but also by fueling the fentanyl addiction crisis here in the United States by efforting the trafficking of that illegal substance into the U.S. territory and resulting in the addiction and deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. The U.S. has also long been very unhappy with Nicolas Maduro being the president of Venezuela. The Biden administration had considered his reelection in 2024 to be illegal. The Trump administration has continued that posture and has strongly signaled that it would like to see Maduro removed from power.
So, Rosiland, what do we think this all means? I mean, and especially considering that over the past few weeks, there's been an increase, I would say, in the number of military personnel in the region.
Well, it's probably not a good sign for the Venezuelan government, if I were to speculate. It is worth also pointing out that on Thursday and Friday, the U.S. Defense Secretary, or Secretary of War, as he likes to call himself, Pete Hegseth, was on board the USS Gerald R. Ford, which is the aircraft carrier that has been deployed to the Caribbean Sea in international waters, but not far from Venezuela. Part of that military show of force to perhaps intimidate the Venezuelan government from carrying out what the U.S. says are illegal criminal narcotics activities. But this is certainly part of that context. Does that mean that military action carried out by the United States is imminent? We can't say that, but certainly it's one more piece of circumstantial evidence that the U.S. is trying to put very overt, very blatant pressure on the Venezuelan government and not just use diplomatic language to try to change course in that country.
What kind of debate has all this sparked in the U.S.? Because, again, over the past few weeks, we know that the U.S. military has killed more than 80 people in boat strikes as part of what Donald Trump and his administration are describing as the anti-drug trafficking campaign.
Well, there hasn't been much in the way of public uproar, but there's been a lot of uproar on Capitol Hill. Congressional Democrats and a few Republicans are very disturbed by this campaign on trying to deal with drug trafficking that traditionally have been carried out as a law enforcement action, with the U.S. Coast Guard basically interdicting these vessels allegedly carrying narcotics, and then arranging for the detention and then transfer to U.S. officials for prosecution, as opposed to carrying out these strikes without notice, without any legal authority on these vessels. And in recent days, you've seen more people, especially on Capitol Hill, but also in the legal community, raising very serious questions about whether the U.S. is carrying out war crimes by basically targeting people without any due diligence, and basically acting as judge and jury rather than going through the long-established, decades-long process of arresting and then prosecuting people for criminal behavior.
Rosalind, stand by for just a moment, because as you were saying, the U.S. has been rapidly increasing its military presence in the Caribbean. Since August, more than 10,000 American soldiers and fighter jets have been deployed near Venezuela. This is the largest deployment of U.S. forces in the region in decades. The U.S. Navy's largest aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford, has arrived in the southern Caribbean, and this is the largest ship of its kind in the world, with its own air wing of more than 75 fighter jets, helicopters, and early warning aircraft. And a Navy destroyer carrying guided missiles, helicopters, and Marines has also arrived in Trinidad and Tobago near Venezuela's coast. Venezuela has put its armed forces on high alert, deploying thousands of troops and a reported 5,000 Russian-made missiles across the country to counter the buildup. And now, what we hear in the past 30 minutes or so is the U.S. President Donald Trump announcing the closure of the airspace above Venezuela. Rosalind, was this expected at all? And do we know why now?
It was not expected. We don't know why. We are trying to reach out to sources across the U.S. government to find out exactly what is happening. I should note that after he made that post about the U.S.'s closure of Venezuelan airspace, he has now posted about a completely unrelated topic, the ongoing issue of tariffs on goods being imported and sold into the United States. So we don't know if this is actual military action that is about to happen, or whether this is one of the statements that the president is prone to make as he very actively and very publicly carries out his foreign policy. This is not a government that does things in quiet negotiations, in mini summits, in world capitals. This is a man who very much says what he believes ought to happen, and he goes right to the U.S. public and to the global public through his social media channel.
Okay, Rosalind, we'll let you go for now. Thank you so much for that reporting from Washington, D.C. We'll speak to Al Jazeera's Latin America editor, Lucia Newman. Lucia, you're joining us from Santiago in Chile on the telephone. Can you tell us if you've seen any official reaction, first of all, from the Venezuelan government to this development?
Well, we had heard just yesterday from President Maduro saying that the United States was increasing its, what he called excuses and lies to try to justify an intervention in Venezuela. And that was before this announcement was made by President Trump. But I can say that the Trump administration has been systematically increasing the pressure on the Maduro government, while at the same time we have been hearing, or reading, I should say, about attempts by President Trump to have a phone conversation with Nicolas Maduro. This has not been confirmed, but it is being widely reported that this conversation did take place in order to have some kind of a face-to-face meeting. Again, this has not been confirmed, but so he's sort of going hot and cold. But what clearly this very week on Monday, he declared the so-called Cartel of the Soles, a narco-terrorist organization, which he says is led by Nicolas Maduro. And then the White House said that the anti-drug offensive that we have been seeing in the Caribbean, that this anti-drug offensive will begin on land. So that is certainly sending the message that there could be some kind of a military action within Venezuela itself.
So how much of an escalation is this, Lucia?
I'm sorry?
How much of an escalation? How much of an escalation?
Well, it is an escalation of words and on paper, but we haven't seen an actual escalation that he would actually go so far. Now I'm speaking about the Pentagon and the administration, whether they would actually attack Venezuela, which is the fear that is being raised, obviously, from everyone in the region. When you tell airlines not to go to Venezuela, when you say that the airspace is now being closed, you're sending a very, very aggressive message. Whether this will play out is another matter altogether. But this has been going on now for a long, long time, and it's unclear whether the administration is willing to actually go into Venezuela or not, but it is supposed to put very, very strong pressure on Maduro, perhaps, and this is the speculation, perhaps to sit down and negotiate his withdrawal from power.
And up until this point, any sign that this pressure that the U.S. government has been trying to put on Venezuela has worked?
None whatsoever, none that we can certainly measure. They've said that they will not cave in to this kind of pressure. They've reached out to their closest allies, that is Russia and China, for help, but both have been rather lukewarm and certainly have not come out publicly to say that they would stand up and by Venezuela's side, especially militarily, if there were to be increased military action around and inside of Venezuela.
Has Venezuela taken any sort of preparatory action in case this were to escalate? We know that the U.S. has amassed more than a dozen warships and thousands of troops in the region. They're branding their operation as an Operation Southern Spear. That's what they're calling it. What has Venezuela done to prepare?
Venezuela has, from the very beginning, when this was just a few U.S. boats and troops around the area shooting and destroying boats that were allegedly carrying drugs in the area, it began to mobilize its army, began to mobilize ordinary people, teaching them how to be prepared for an invasion, that sort of thing, which we have seen in Venezuela over the decades. This is not new. The real question is Venezuela really in a position to defend itself, whether to be military action from the United States? I'm sure they would resist. But the strategy, according to people who are in the know, both there and abroad, is that this is to tell the Venezuelan military that they should now withdraw their support for Maduro and that there will be no sanctions taken against them if they do that. This is what we have been hearing now for at least a month. This is for them to desert, basically, Nicolás Maduro and the upper echelons of the military forces of Venezuela so that there will be regime change. That seems to be really the end game.
Okay, thank you. Lucia, we'll let you go for now. Thank you so much for that reporting from Santiago in Chile.